In the last lesson, we focused on handling errors gracefully to make our app more reliable. With that foundation in place, the next step is to start building functions that will decode our server data. To begin, head over to Content View and delete the unappeared block. This was a placeholder for testing and no longer needed. Next, navigate to our errors file. Here, we'll create a new enum to manage and categorize any network-related errors. Make some space after the closing brace. Enum, network error, error, localized error, brace. Inside the braces case, bad URL response, parentheses, underlying error, error, enter, case, missing config, enter twice, var, error description. If your suggestion from the editor matches mine, press tab to autocomplete. Once again, the editor's autocomplete gives us the correct structure. Press tab to save some time. This is similar to our API config error enum above. The case bad URL response will trigger if the application encounters an issue with the server response. Some examples include a wrong website address, a server error, or a response that doesn't match the expected format. Case missing config triggers if something goes wrong with the configuration of our API config file. We'll need this when we unwrap our API key and base URL. By handling these scenarios, we ensure our app can gracefully manage unexpected issues during network requests. With our enum ready, we can make a new file to hold our network functions. Press Command N, Swift file, next, data fetcher, create. Our file is ready. Hit enter once after import foundation. Let tmdb base URL equals API config.shared.tmdb base URL. Enter. Let tmdb API key equals API config.shared.tmdb API key. We define the variables globally so that all of our functions can access them. Since the singleton API config.shared is optional, these variables are optionals as well. This ensures that if there's an issue decoding the API config file, our app won't crash, but handle the missing configurations. Hit enter a couple times after API key, func, fetch, titles, parentheses, for, media, string, close parentheses, async, throws, return arrow, bracket, title, bracket, braces. Let's break down this function. We know that fetch titles is the name. It takes one parameter, a string called media. The for in front of media is called an argument label. Argument labels make the function call more descriptive and easier to understand. We used for here, but you can use any word that fits your use case. Async throws means this function will run on a different thread than the main thread and might throw an error. This is important because as a network call, we don't want it running on the main thread with the UI. Doing so can lead to performance drops and a less responsive app. Finally, the return arrow indicates that this function will return an array of our title model. The purpose of this function is to connect to the URL and attempt to fetch the titles inside. The first step in this function is to build the URL where our data is located. To give you a better idea, I'll paste an example of what the URL should look like for training movies. It starts with our base URL, followed by several directories, and ends with a query that includes your API key. To continue, we need to unwrap our TMDB base URL and TMDB API key. Inside the function, guard let base URL equals TMDB base URL else with braces. Inside the braces, throw network error dot missing config. Below that, guard let API key equals tmdb API key else with braces. Same thing, throw network error dot missing config. These checks ensure that TMDB base URL and TMDB API key are not nil. If they're available, they'll be assigned a base URL and API key respectively. However, if either of them are nil, the function will stop and throw the network error.missing config case. This will signal an issue with the configuration. With our base URL and API key values unwrapped, we can build the URL. Make some space, let fetch titles URL equals URL, parenthesis string, colon, base URL, question mark, enter, dot appending, parentheses path, quotes 3 / trending, backslash, parentheses media, parentheses / day, enter, dot appending, parentheses query items, bracket, enter, URL query item, name, parenthesis API underscore key, tab, API key. This builds the exact URL we have at the top. It adds the paths, including the media string and the parameters. Then, it appends the query items, including our API key as an argument. Query items are pairs of information added to the URL to send data to the server. Quick note, we use a question mark after the URL because the URL string initializer returns an optional. This means that if the string is invalid, the code will safely return nil instead of crashing. At this point, our URL is complete and ready to use. You've done an excellent job laying the groundwork for fetching data. In the next video, we'll build on this and complete the function. As always, great work.